everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gripe, the show for short, sweet reviews of new release movies, plus the one thing that annoyed me the most. And today I'm going to be talking about Neighbors 2 Sorority Rising. So, as you can guess, this is a sequel to a movie called Neighbors. I know it's really hard to figure that out, but it is. So, the original Neighbors, I was not all that interested in seeing it because, truth be told, I'm not a big fan of Seth Rogen. It had Seth Rogen, Rose Byrne, Ike Bernholtz, Zac Efron, Dave Franco, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, the McLovin, basically was in it. And it was one of those movies that just seemed like kind of an Animal House college, frat movie ripoff sort of thing, which, nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I wasn't, all that excited to really see it that much. But it turns out I actually, a decently enjoyable movie. I wouldn't say it was anything really new. They didn't really tread any new ground. Certainly a dirty, fun movie, which, pretty much is what comedies have come to these days, is just dirty and fun. But either way, we get our sequel. Not sure we asked for it, but we got it anyway. And the logical thing is after the fraternity comes through, now it's the sorority's turn. So, in this movie, Chloe Grace Moretz plays a freshman who gets there and tries to pledge a sorority and realizes that the system is kind of stacked against sororities. The women on campus really can't throw their own parties. They're pretty much objectified anytime they go to frat parties. So, what they wanted out of the sorority experience is kind of lost. So they decide, she and a few other girls that she kind of gets into her good graces with some ganja. They decide to start their own sorority. And of course, they move into the very same house that was the frat house in the first Neighbors movie. Now, in this movie, Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne, they start out, they get pregnant again, so they're going to have another kid. And, they swear that they're good parents, but, in reality, they're not that good of parents. There's a running joke throughout the movie. I don't know if I should give it away. I might give it away later, but it's funny what they let their daughter play with and kind of get away with. But they're trying to move to a house in the suburbs, so they're putting up this house for them on the market, and they get a buyer, so now their house is in escrow for 30 days. So they basically have 30 days to make sure that nothing goes wrong and the buyers don't back out during their inspection period. And as you can imagine, it just is that basic setup for, okay, now we're going to have ourselves a good old-fashioned ticking clock, college, revenge type movie. And so, of course, when the sorority moves in, they do everything they can to get them shut down so that, they don't lose this house or they don't lose the sale on their house, which means they would have two homes. And obviously they can't afford that. So in the end, they probably have no homes. So when the sorority moves in, they do what they can to, challenge, Chloe Grace Moretz's character, and get them to leave. But since they're a new sorority and they don't exactly know what they're doing, they call on the help of somebody who has some experience. And that's Zac Efron's character is back. Now, in the previous movie, he was the ringleader. He was the guy that, everyone kind of looked up to. But now, as, he's graduated from college and, he's in his own, world, but he really doesn't have an identity yet. He doesn't really have a place. He's been living with Dave Franco, and Dave Franco's boyfriend, proposes to him. So now it's like, okay, now Zac Efron's got to get out. So basically what it comes down to is he needs to find his place in the world. And so he decides he's going to do it by, helping this sorority, kind of build themselves up, and also to mess with Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne, because they really, threw him under the bus and gave him a criminal record, as he likes to point out. But as as their sort of back and forth amps up, he comes to realize that the sorority doesn't really want him there, and they don't respect him for who he is. So ultimately he switches sides, and now he's going to act a little more adult and try to help Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne take down the sorority. And of course, hijinks ensue. A party is had, and at the end of the day, everybody learns a lesson. I'm summing up the end of the movie pretty quickly because it's, what else do you expect? It's about as predictable a movie as you can get. The whole purpose of the movie is to give you some cheap laughs, have, some funny, some good funny moments, and then just say, okay, good, we're good. Um, I mean, that's the basic story. I mean, Rose Byrne and Seth Rogen kind of learn about themselves as parents. Um, Zac Efron learns about himself as, an individual and, having an identity and finding his purpose in life. And then the sorority kind of like looks at, losing their way, finding themselves and then losing their way just as quickly when they have to, get money in order to, pay their rent. That's why they throw this big party, this, big, party that they would, you would expect to see at a frat house, and, it goes against everything that they believed. Overall, it's not a great movie. I mean, it's funny. It's got a lot of very funny stuff. Like I said, there's a running gag in it that just killed me, and there's a few jokes alongside that gag throughout the movie that are just amazing. The delivery, the context of it, just everything about that joke, I absolutely loved. Let's just say it has to do with a vibrator dressed as a princess. So. Just saying, it's ridiculous. But I mean, the movie doesn't really tread any new ground. It pretty much, follows in the same sort of, humor, even some of the same kinds of jokes that you saw in the first one. They don't necessarily try to amp up what they did the first time. It's just a different situation. It's like, okay, this time it's a sorority, and so girls are going to be different, and, there's just, the whole, like, modern technology that kids are so locked into. There's a scene basically when they kick Zac Efron out. They basically have a council together as a sorority while he's giving them this speech. They basically have this council and vote him out over text message. It's kind of ridiculous in a way. It's satirical in a way, but it's also kind of true in a way as well. Like I said, the movie itself is very basic. It's very predictable. There's not a whole lot that you can kind of point to and say, this is something that the movie really challenged me on. This is something that, I wouldn't have expected. Because pretty much everything that's in here, I would have expected. I, wasn't, the funny parts are ones that just it's those jokes that when they hit. But then there's also moments where the jokes don't hit very well. There's a couple of montage scenes that, they really try to make it funny, but it really isn't. And then there's a couple of just shocking jokes. One in particular, when they're trying to, show the buyers that, it's not a sorority that lives next door, it's a nice, Jewish family. And that scene is so incredibly offensive, and yet it's that kind of, offensive humor that you'd expect from movies like this. It actually is, funny, and we're all terrible people for laughing at it, but it's the truth. There's not a lot to really talk about with this movie because it's so simple, it's so predictable, it's so much like the first one that it's really, it's almost like if the first one were another hour and a half longer, it would just be the first one going right into this movie and then off into infinity. That's really what it is. Which, you could, good or bad, doesn't really matter, I guess. As long as you enjoy the movie, I think that's the important part. Objectively, it's not a very good movie, but walking out of it, I was laughing. I, enjoyed parts of it. There are things that definitely made me laugh out loud, and a few that got me laughing for a good, duration, which, doesn't happen very often. I liked, that's the reason I went to see this movie. I didn't expect this movie to be, something that just blew my mind. I knew it was going to be something that just would give me some cheap laughs for an hour and a half, which it did, but it wasn't really anything special. And, if I had to, there's probably a lot of things I could give this movie as a key gripe, because, it's a sequel, so you have to take it into account with the original. It's like, is it as good as the original? Well, yeah, I'd actually probably even say I liked it a little bit better than the original. But do they fall into some of those sequel pitfalls that, for comedies? Comedy sequels always tend to have something from the original that they pull back in. Characters is one thing, but running jokes that they'll pull back in. And they did that here, which I'm not sure, it landed, it was okay, but, it wasn't necessarily, I don't know. Basically, my key gripe, there's a scene where the Zac Efron and Seth Rogen are trying to shut down the party, and they get trapped in a garage somehow. Still not sure exactly how that happened, but when they're in the garage, they're trying to figure out a way out. They can't. I mean, apparently these are like super doors, so they can't just break through them with what they have in the garage. So what they decide to do is go back to what happened in the first movie and pull a airbag out of the car that's in the garage. And they're going to try to use that to launch themselves out of this vent in the top of the garage. So the reason this is my key gripe is because it's just the entire joke is there as a throwback to the first movie. And I mean, for a movie like this, you don't necessarily need to have that throwback to the original movie. And for it especially to be a climactic moment like that, a moment where like this is like a tide turning type of moment where Zac Efron and Seth Rogen, they have this emotional moment, and then they go right back to the to that gag that in the first movie actually ended up with like some tragedy. It's like this being on the airbag, being on the chair when the airbag goes off, like physically hurts him badly. And here, I mean, he gets even worse than he did in that movie, and somehow just kind of gets up and walks away. And it's that repetition of jokes across sequels, and especially at critical moments. If it were just like thrown in there as like an Easter egg, that's one thing. But in this case, when they use the same joke for like a critical moment, because it's like, oh, remember this in the first movie? Everybody liked that, so let's use it here in the big moment of this movie. I don't like that. I think that's lazy screenwriting. It's it's good for a laugh, but other than that, it's lazy. And so I was disappointed that they kind of went back to that well, because for the most part, a lot of what they were doing was fairly new. They were trying some newer things, some new shot gags to really get people, to get things going. But in this case, they went right back to that well of what they had done in the first movie, and I don't think it landed. But I mean, if that's the worst key gripe from this movie, I mean, great. But I mean, overall, it's not a spectacular movie to begin with. It's, I don't want to use the word meh as a description for this movie, but it kind of is in a sense. It's just sort of it's there, it does its thing, and you get some laughs out of it. You remember a couple things, but even a couple days later, I don't remember all of it because it's kind of a forgettable movie. In the moment, yeah, there's some good laughs, and it's one of those that when you see it in the theater, you watch it with friends, yeah, you're going to get some laughs and people are going to enjoy it, but you're not going to walk away from it going, that is the greatest movie I've ever seen. Because it's not. It's really not. You could say it's the mediocrest movie I've ever seen, but definitely not the greatest. It's, a solid 6.5 type of movie because it does have a lot of very good humor in it. It's, better than a lot of comedies that come out in terms of like timing and all that, but it's also just recycled, and there's not a lot new. There's nothing really new in it. I mean, in the context of the, between this and the original Neighbors, this one is better. And actually, this one does have a decent ending, too, in terms of, even though, like, everybody, it has a stereotypical ending, there is kind of this humanizing moment at the end of the movie when when Seth Rogen and Rose Byrne really realize, who they are as parents and kind of like what, the future that they're going with. I mean, it's not deeply emotional, but it's a fairly humanizing moment, and you got to appreciate movies that do that. Not to mention, they took a decent risk, having Dave Franco's character as, this very, just like, just the best way to say it is that he is just, your normal gay man, and that's like, you don't see that enough in movies. And I'm not trying to get political with this, but I mean, it's comforting to see because you watch it and it's just like, great, that's awesome. And then, it's just part of the story. It's not something that they focus on with like a real big lens. It's just like, this is it. And yeah, that's the way it is, which is, cool and refreshing to see. Doesn't mean that makes this movie groundbreaking or awesome in any way. It just makes it, adorable, humorous, meh. So, but overall, I mean, funny movie, good for a couple of laughs, if that's what you're looking for, if you're into laughs. I like laughing, personally. It's my thing. So that's my review of Neighbors 2, and I will see you next time on Key Gripe. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.